Another dark chapter of American history is coming back to haunt us. And this time, it's not the stories you read in school. Beneath the tales of bravery and brotherhood lies a shocking truth, a brutal record of war crimes that both the Union and Confederate forces desperately tried to bury. Civilians were slaughtered, prisoners were massacred, and entire cities were reduced to ashes. What really happened during America's bloodiest conflict? Join us as we expose 10 undeniable war crimes from the U.S. Civil War crimes that are so horrific, history can never erase them. But remember, if you love uncovering these facts about the Old West, kindly click on that subscribe button and support this channel. Your support will encourage us to dig deeper into the real stories behind legends. Now stay tuned as we bring you these mind-blowing facts. The Massacre at Fort Pillow, 1864. One of the first and mind-blowing crimes occurred in April 1864, when Confederate forces under General Nathan Bedford Forrest attacked Fort Pillow, Tennessee. This incident is one of the most notorious examples of war crimes during the Civil War. After Union soldiers, including many African Americans, attempted to surrender, Forrest's men executed over 300 prisoners in cold blood. Survivors recounted brutal scenes: soldiers shot, bayoneted, and even burned alive. This massacre was not merely a consequence of battle, it was a deliberate act of racial terror. The brutality displayed at Fort Pillow highlighted the racial animosity that permeated the conflict. Despite the presence of established norms for the treatment of prisoners of war, the actions at Fort Pillow represented a gross violation of these standards, even by 19th century expectations. The aftermath of the massacre led to outrage in the North, with many calling for justice against Forrest and his men. However, the Confederate leadership largely defended the actions taken at Fort Pillow, framing them as a necessary measure against what they viewed as an insurrection. This incident remains a stark reminder of the racial violence that characterized the Civil War and its aftermath. Sherman's March to the Sea, 1864. In 1864, General William Tecumseh Sherman's campaign through Georgia, known as Sherman's March to the Sea, marked a significant shift in military strategy, embracing the concept of total war. Sherman's forces systematically destroyed civilian infrastructure, including farms, railroads, and homes, leaving a path of devastation in their wake. The intent was to break the will of the Southern populace and hasten the end of the war. While Sherman justified his actions as necessary for achieving victory, the targeting of civilian property raises ethical questions that persist to this day. Entire towns were reduced to ashes, and civilians were left starving in the wake of the destruction. The sheer scale of the devastation inflicted upon Georgia's landscape and its people was unprecedented, and historians continue to debate whether such tactics constituted war crimes. The psychological impact of Sherman's march on the Southern populace was profound. It instilled fear and hopelessness, contributing to the overall demoralization of the Confederacy. While some viewed Sherman as a military genius, others saw him as a perpetrator of war crimes against innocent civilians. And here comes the shocker you don't want to miss. Stay tuned. Andersonville Prison Horrors, 1864 to 1865. The Confederate prison at Andersonville, Georgia, stands as one of the most infamous examples of wartime cruelty. Designed to hold 10,000 prisoners, it became a hellish environment where over 32,000 Union soldiers were crammed into overcrowded conditions. The prisoners faced filth, starvation, and rampant disease, leading to a staggering mortality rate. Nearly 13,000 men died from these appalling conditions. Commandant Henry Wirtz, who oversaw Andersonville, was later tried and executed for war crimes after the war. His trial marked one of the few instances where a Confederate officer faced consequences for actions taken during the conflict. The conditions at Andersonville were emblematic of the broader failures in the treatment of prisoners of war, raising questions about the ethical obligations of warring parties. The legacy of Andersonville serves as a grim reminder of the capacity for human cruelty in times of war. The suffering endured by the prisoners highlights the need for humane treatment of all individuals, regardless of their status as combatants or non-combatants. The burning of Columbia, South Carolina, 1865. As Sherman's forces advanced through the South, they encountered Columbia, South Carolina, a city that would become synonymous with destruction. Upon entering the city, fires erupted, consuming homes, libraries, churches, and other significant structures. Sherman attributed the fires to retreating Confederate troops, but many eyewitness accounts, including those from Union soldiers, suggested that drunken troops deliberately set buildings ablaze. The destruction of Columbia symbolized the brutal toll the war exacted on civilian populations. The city, once a thriving center of commerce and culture, was left in ruins. The debate over whether the fires were accidental or intentional continues to this day, but the impact on the civilian population was undeniable. Families were left homeless, and the cultural heritage of the city was irreparably damaged. The burning of Columbia exemplifies the collateral damage of war, particularly the impact on non-combatants who often bear the brunt of military actions. It raises important ethical questions about the responsibilities of military leaders to protect civilian lives and property during wartime. The Lawrence Massacre, 1863. Before Sherman's march, another horrific event unfolded in Lawrence, Kansas. In 1863, Confederate guerrillas led by William Quantrill launched a brutal attack on the town, resulting in the murder of over 150 civilians. Many victims were dragged from their homes and executed in front of their families. This massacre was a direct retaliation for Union actions in Missouri, illustrating the cycle of violence that characterized the Civil War. The Lawrence Massacre stands as a stark example of the deliberate targeting of non-combatants. The brutality of the attack shocked the nation and highlighted the moral complexities of the conflict. While guerrilla warfare was common during the Civil War, the indiscriminate slaughter of civilians crossed a line that many found unacceptable. The aftermath of the massacre prompted further violence in the region, as Union forces sought retribution against Confederate sympathizers. The cycle of violence perpetrated by such acts underscores the tragic consequences of war, where civilian lives are often caught in the crossfire of larger military objectives. But it did not end there. The Battle of Poison Spring, 1864. One of the most upsetting war crimes of the Civil War unfolded at the Battle of Poison Spring in Arkansas, marking yet another grim and brutal chapter in American history. During this encounter, Confederate forces ambushed a Union supply train, with their aggression specifically aimed at the Black Union soldiers who were part of the defending troops. In a horrifying display of racial hatred, many African American soldiers who attempted to surrender were mercilessly shot, bayoneted, or otherwise slaughtered on the battlefield. Their pleas for mercy were met with brutal violence, exposing the deep racial animosity that fueled such atrocities. The massacre at Poison Spring mirrored the horrors witnessed at Fort Pillow, another instance where Black soldiers were singled out for particularly savage treatment. These atrocities were not isolated incidents, but rather reflected the broader societal attitudes of deep-seated racism that persisted even within the chaos of war. Even more disturbing was the near-total lack of accountability following these events. Justice for the victims was virtually non-existent, and the perpetrators faced few, if any, consequences. The legacy of Poison Spring stands as a painful reminder of the racial tensions that permeated every facet of the Civil War era. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable truths about the conflict, that the war was not only a fight over Union and independence, but also a violent battleground for the fundamental human rights of African Americans. Understanding these dark moments is crucial for acknowledging the long, ongoing struggle against systemic racism. Starvation tactics in the Siege of Vicksburg, 1863. The Siege of Vicksburg, one of the most pivotal and harrowing moments of the Civil War, highlighted the grim realities of warfare and its devastating effects on civilian populations. Under the command of Union General Ulysses S. Grant, Union forces relentlessly bombarded the city of Vicksburg, cutting off all supply lines and surrounding the city for weeks. As the siege dragged on, the residents, both civilians and soldiers, faced unspeakable hardships. Starvation became rampant, and in their desperation, the inhabitants resorted to eating whatever they could find: dogs, rats, and even the leather of shoes, as food supplies dwindled to nothing. The use of starvation as a deliberate tactic against civilian populations raises profound ethical concerns. While siege tactics involving deprivation of food and supplies have been employed throughout history, the intentional suffering inflicted on non-combatants during the siege of Vicksburg is a stark reminder of the blurred lines between soldiers and civilians in times of war. The ethical ramifications of targeting civilians in this manner are now widely condemned under modern international law, especially after the Geneva Conventions were established. The agony of Vicksburg's residents serves as a somber reminder of the human cost of war, how the effects of military strategies can devastate not only soldiers, but entire communities. The legacy of the siege reinforces the importance of protecting civilian lives and ensuring that humanitarian concerns are prioritized, even amid the chaos of armed conflict. Draft riots and mass lynching in New York, 1863. Another shocking and often overlooked fact is that not all Civil War atrocities occurred on the battlefield. Some erupted violently in the streets of American cities. In July 1863, New York City was rocked by one of the bloodiest civil disturbances in American history, the draft riots. Immigrant mobs, primarily composed of Irish Americans, lashed out in a wave of fury against the Union draft laws, fueled by deep-seated resentment and racial animosity. African Americans became the primary targets of their rage, suffering horrific acts of violence. Over 100 people were killed during the riots, with lynchings, brutal beatings, and arson becoming tragically commonplace. The New York draft riots laid bare the deep racial tensions that simmered beneath the surface of Northern society. While the Union fought against the Confederacy ostensibly to preserve the nation and end slavery, many in the North were themselves resistant to the idea of racial equality. The violence was not merely a reaction to conscription, but a stark manifestation of broader societal struggles over race, class, and privilege during the Civil War era. These brutal events serve as a sobering reminder that the Civil War was not just a fight between North and South over slavery, but also a profound and painful internal struggle over the very meaning of freedom and justice. Understanding the social dynamics that fueled the New York draft riots is essential for recognizing the long, ongoing battle for racial justice, a battle that continues to shape American society to this day. This is where it gets even more complicated, so stick around to the end for the full gist. Prisoner abuse at Elmira, 1864 to 1865. While the Confederate South is often associated with the most notorious war crimes of the Civil War, the North was not without its own grave transgressions. One of the most glaring examples was Elmira Prison in New York, where Confederate prisoners of war endured appalling conditions. Overcrowded barracks, freezing temperatures, malnutrition, and rampant disease turned the camp into a nightmare. Nearly 25% of the prisoners held there died during their captivity, a staggering death rate that raised significant ethical concerns about the Union's treatment of its enemies. Some historians argue that the conditions at Elmira were not merely the result of poor planning or mismanagement, but rather reflected a degree of intentional cruelty. This challenges the traditional narrative that the Union consistently held moral high ground during the conflict. The horrors of Elmira mirrored in many ways the infamous Andersonville prison in the South, revealing a troubling pattern of neglect and dehumanization that transcended regional lines. The legacy of Elmira Prison serves as a sobering reminder that the principles of humanity, dignity, and compassion must extend to all individuals, even in times of war. It forces a deeper examination of the complexities of historical memory, highlighting that both sides of the Civil War committed acts that violated basic standards of human decency. The treatment of prisoners during this era raises important questions about accountability, justice, and the moral responsibilities of warring nations. Questions that continue to resonate in discussions of warfare and ethics today. The Sand Creek Massacre, 1864. While technically outside the main battlefields of the Civil War, the Sand Creek Massacre represents a particularly dark and shameful chapter in American history. On November 29, 1864, Union troops under the command of Colonel John Chivington attacked a peaceful encampment of Cheyenne and Arapaho people along Sand Creek in the Colorado Territory. Despite the villagers flying an American flag and a white flag of truce, signaling their peaceful intentions, the soldiers launched a brutal assault at dawn. Over 150 Native Americans were slaughtered, the vast majority of them women, children, and the elderly. The violence of the attack went beyond killing. Bodies were mutilated, and soldiers took grotesque trophies from the dead, actions that reflected the deep dehumanization and racial hatred toward indigenous peoples at the time. Though Chivington initially received praise from some local settlers, widespread public outrage eventually followed as details of the massacre emerged. Congressional and military investigations condemned Chivington's actions, but he was never formally punished. The Sand Creek Massacre highlights the intersection of the Civil War with broader patterns of American expansionism and systemic violence against Native populations. It reveals how the ideologies of manifest destiny and racial superiority justified horrific acts in the name of progress and national unity. Understanding the Sand Creek Massacre is essential for confronting the historical injustices inflicted upon Native Americans. It serves as a stark reminder of the atrocities woven into the fabric of American history and underscores the urgent need for recognition, remembrance, and reconciliation in ongoing discussions about race, justice, and national identity. The Civil War forged a nation, but it also left deep scars. War crimes committed on both sides remind us that even in a fight for noble causes, humanity can sink into darkness. Understanding these truths doesn't erase history, it forces us to confront it. The legacy of these atrocities serves as a cautionary tale, urging future generations to prioritize humanity and compassion in the face of conflict. The sufferings of the dead soldiers should not be in vain. As we reflect on the Civil War and its impact, it is crucial to acknowledge the complexities of the human experience during wartime. The stories of suffering, resilience, and moral ambiguity challenge us to learn from the past and strive for a more just and humane future. The lessons drawn from these events remain relevant today, reminding us of the importance of upholding the principles of justice, equality, and respect for all individuals, regardless of their circumstances. Which of these crimes shocked you the most? Also, how do you think they affected the current world system? Let's hear your thoughts in the comments section. And remember, if you enjoyed this ride through history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon. Got a favorite Western legend or movie? Drop it in the comments, we might cover it next.